Welcome to The Human Experience, a podcast about the stories we live out every day and the importance of championing the vulnerability and courage of the storyteller. I'm your host, Jennifer Peterkin, and it was through my own lived story of experiencing domestic violence that this podcast was created. By traveling the globe and interviewing each guest in person, I am convinced now more than ever that stories have the power to change the world. You can join our community of storytellers by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, signing up for my newsletter, following me on Instagram, and more. Thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, to listen with intention is an act of resistance.
The more I kept going deeper, the more layers I kept peeling back, the more I realized that there were no answers. There were only more questions. And then I realized that when the questions stop, everything stops. Because when you stop being curious, when you stop asking questions, you're really no longer alive.
Episode 43 of The Human Experience is Bruce's story. Bruce spent all of his adult life building his career in the corporate world. And just as he was beginning to wind down and consider retirement, he got a diagnosis that would change everything. Bruce's story is a beautiful example of what happens when we let go of our illusion of control and begin to get curious about life and about each other. As Bruce says, he's 82, but that's 28 if you look at it from a different angle. Having the ability to consider, hold, and celebrate different perspectives is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves, and one in which Bruce is well-versed. This episode was recorded in Charlotte, North Carolina. I really love creating something organic, right? Because then you really don't know what's going to happen, which is just really fun and ends up, I think, creating some really cool conversations.
And creative, I think, is the key word there, because if it's all scripted, then
That's right.
It got creative once, but not
That's true. That's true. Yeah. No, I enjoy it. It's fun. How many podcasts have you done?
8 or 10, maybe. I don't know.
Good for you. Good for you.
Well, they're kind of fun. I mean,
I'm glad you think they're fun.
Well, in some ways, I've thought about this. In some ways, nothing really replaces a reading, a book talk, a room with 20 or 30 people in it. Nothing replaces that, really. But you can cover so much more ground with a podcast. I did a reading in Winston-Salem. By the time I got up there, may have had 8 or 10 hours invested in it. There may have been 30 people there. May have sold 10 books, 10 hours.
Yeah.
I do a 30-minute podcast if it's a Zoom call,
Sure, yeah.
And it gets all kinds of audience, and who knows what happens. So from a productivity standpoint, the podcast can be have far more reach.
Yeah.
But there's, even right now, this is different than
I know. You're like, I don't know what to think about her.
You're really there.
Which is why I am doing it this way. Just for me and my guest. I'm so happy to put these stories out, and I've gotten such great feedback from people on these stories, but I truly feel like this is a one-of-a-kind experience for me every time I do this, because I actually get to sit and listen. And you're right, being in proximity to each other is a completely different experience than doing something online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So when did you write your book?
When?
Yeah.
Well, it took over 3 years, maybe almost 4 years to write. Mm-hmm. So it was published in March of 23, so it started, back 4 years before then. It took about 3 years of really writing and rewriting, and then about a year of editing and artwork and all of the kinds of things, copy editing and so forth, proofreading, that go into getting the final product out there.
Sure. Did you ever think that you would be a published author?
Not in my wildest dreams. I'm just an average guy that spent a bunch of years in corporate America and then decided to strike out on his own and started a business back in 1980. And the business, continued to do well. Had its moments, as all new businesses do.
Of course.
But did well, and it was time to sell it. I had hoped our children might take it over, and they worked there for a while, but found other interest and that's cool. Glad they did. They're very happy with what they're doing. I had offered the business to the vice presidents, but in a way that they could do it over time and easy and pay for it out of profit.
Sure.
But our industry was consolidating, and they were just worried about whether they could keep it in the road. And it became obvious that the best thing for us to do was find somebody who would buy us. And I was on my way to meet with that buyer when I discovered a lump on the left side of my neck that turned out to be cancer.
Wow.
And so I had to decide, do I continue on with the sale, get that done, and treat the cancer later? Or do I treat the cancer and come back and finish the sale? And there were pros and cons to both. But the one thing I didn't like was that it was stage 3 cancer, and how fast does it become stage 4? And maybe you ought to get the cancer out of the way first.
Yeah.
But I ended up deciding that I would do both at the same time. And that created an interesting dynamic and really turned out, I think, to be very helpful, because one would take my mind off the other. And while I had no intent of micromanaging the cancer treatment, I certainly could have micromanaged the sale of the business to the fault of, it turned out I was better off to let the attorneys manage the sale, let the doctors manage the cancer, and I just lean back and enjoy the ride. So that's what I did. Now, that's a long way of getting to, did I ever dream of writing a book?
That was a pretty good way of getting there, though.
So there were stories associated with all of this that I just kept telling. I mean, you do that. Somebody asks you a question and you tell a story. And at one point I said, you could string all these stories together and either one might have merit, but the fact that they both started the same time and miraculously ended at the same time, because I rang the bell for the last cancer treatment on Wednesday. The deal closed on Thursday, and the check hit my bank on Friday.
Wow. That's quite a week you had.
So 4 months prior, I'm getting ready to fly to Baltimore for this buyer. Lump on my neck, all in a few days. 4 months later, ring the bell, cash the check.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, actually, that it lined up that much.
So when you think about that, you say, that's kind of a neat story. Maybe I ought to tell that. And I'd always been a bit of a storyteller in the business. I really ran the business more with stories than I did with operation manuals or things like that. I would often tell stories about how to do something wrong in regard to how to do it right. Like, you don't want to do it this way because you want to do it this way instead. And I would be always the example of the guy that did it the wrong way. I guess a perfect example is we represented a number of clients, and so I might tell a client that I knew far more about the Carolinas than he did, and he ought to just butt out and let me run it. And I might win the battle but lose the war because 2 or 3 months later we'd get fired. And so those kinds of stories became what the company ran on of, don't do it the way Bruce does it, do it this way, it'll come out better. So that storytelling led to just writing the book.
Well, I am a huge fan of stories, as you probably know, just because we're sitting here because of that. But I would say you reminded me of my grandfather when you were talking about that, just because I feel like he was the same way in that everything was about relationship building, right? And so stories are the building blocks of relationships. So I love that. That's really beautiful.
Well, relationships is such a cool word. I think cool in the meaningful sense. I think we live in a transactional world, and that has some value, but it's not the same as a relationship. Transactions are over and done, and you're on to the next conquest. Relationships last forever and ever and ever, or they can. The good ones certainly can. And I really enjoy relationships far more than transactions.
Yeah, I agree. So are you native to Charlotte?
No. I was born in St. Louis, moved around a bit. Started my business career with Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, Ohio. Went from there to Dayton, back to Cincinnati, to Indianapolis, where I met my wife, Joyce. We then went to Kansas City, then to Chicago, then to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And it was in Winston-Salem that we fell in love with the Carolinas, and we were facing another corporate relocation to San Francisco. Great town. Our children were about 7 and 9 at that time. And we could have gone to San Francisco. It would have been maybe our 5th relocation as a family. And Joyce and I just decided that enough was enough. And so we moved to Charlotte in 1979. And here we are still.
And you started your business in 1980.
Yeah, started the business in 1980.
Okay, wow. And all of those moves were for corporate?
Yeah. Well,
wow.
From 63 up until
79.
79. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of moving around.
Yeah.
God bless your wife.
Well, that's exactly. When we were first dating and it got kind of serious, I said, you really have to understand, I'm a man of the corporate, and wherever they send me is where I'll go. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to stay together, you're going to have to get used to that. And, she said, okay. So then 17 years later, when I said, I really think I want to settle down someplace, she was like, whoa, where'd that come from?
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. And are your children still in the area as well?
Both of our children live in Charlotte. All 4 grandchildren. I guess they call Charlotte home, although our oldest grandson is in New York City working for Ernst & Young. He graduated from Fordham University in the Bronx, and so
he's
in New York.
He's a city guy now.
I think we've lost him to
the Northeast.
Yeah,
it is a magical place.
Yeah, it really is. His girlfriend's from Annapolis. They're both sailors. Yeah, they may come back, but it'll be a while.
But yeah, so New York City. There you go. You'll just have to go there.
Yeah,
go visit him there. That's fantastic. So you are in business for, when did you actually sell?
Actually, 17 and 30, so 47 years.
Yeah. Wow. So
I'm an old guy.
No, I'm.
A while ago, you said you reminded me of your grandfather. And
I mean,
thought, yeah, I bet.
I mean your business that you started in 1980. When did you actually sell? What year did you sell that?
2010.
Okay.
So 30 years.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that's a long time to own a business. My family has their own business as well, and my grandfather did pass the business on to his kids.
Uh-huh.
He had 7 kids, so there were more of them to take it. Not all of them work there, but yeah, now we're in 3rd generation that some of us work there.
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
Yeah,
that's neat.
It is really cool.
Yeah,
so
it's great when that can happen, and the business is in an industry that will allow that to happen.
Yeah. Yes.
Some industries will allow it to happen, others won't. That's a giant swing, a pendulum that swings over time, and consolidation is a tough animal. It really can mess up some long-term family business.
Oh, absolutely. Technology.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can be detrimental for sure. But I'm glad that you seem to have found your way forward, that selling was the best. Was that still the best option, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the industry is totally consolidated now, and some just do that. Now and then you can carve out a niche, but not always. So, yeah, everybody ended up happy, and none of us are meant to do anything forever.
That's true. Yeah. So you've been retired then since 2010?
Yes.
Okay. How are you liking retirement after being a very busy corporate man for so long?
Well, that's always good to think about, because I think too many of my contemporaries are so caught up in their business, especially men. Well, women too these days, but especially men of my generation, who all they knew was their work.
Yeah.
Never really planned for what they were going to do next. And that's often a missing ingredient in a happy retirement. And you can only play so many rounds of golf, or at least I could, until you get a little bored.
Yeah.
So thinking about what you're going to do next, I think, is important. As much as I like the idea of living in the moment, because I try to do a lot of that, I do think there's a certain amount of hindsight and a certain amount of looking ahead that's necessary, because the choices we make matter.
Yeah.
And thinking about what the next 5-10 years will bring is always worthwhile. Now, I'm not saying you need to be there every day, but I think now and then you need to think about, where am I really headed?
Agreed. So when retirement came upon you, was that accelerated because of your cancer at all?
No.
Okay,
not
that was already the plan.
Not a bit. And that's a bit of an interesting story as well, because the last thing I wanted was for the buyer to know that I was going through cancer treatment. Somehow the scale, in my mind, the scale gets tipped a little bit in the favor of the buyer if the seller is wounded in any way.
Okay.
And so to me, in my logic, it made sense no need to divulge the fact that I had cancer.
Sure.
Continue to negotiate from a position of strength, a strong balance sheet, and say, if this deal falls apart, fine, I'm good where I am, no problem.
Yeah.
But the minute panic sets in, it looks different.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's very true. So you sell the business, you go into remission, yeah, and you get your check. Yeah. What does the next year's look like?
Well, because I had already been very active in the community and some other volunteer work, the sale of the business and the cancer really interrupted 2 things that were already underway. One was an active involvement in programs that help the homeless here in Charlotte, and the other was some work that I was doing in conjunction with our church in El Salvador in Central America. I had been actively involved in both of those in the business and was very active involved in them at the time of the sale and the cancer. So I simply, once I was able, I simply picked back up where I had left off. The work here in Charlotte was easier to do because it was not so straining. The work in El Salvador took me a while to get back to because that was in partnership with Habitat for Humanity, building homes in El Salvador. So that was both physically challenging, not just from the travel, but from the home construction.
Sure.
Those are cinder block homes and, not the easiest to build. So it took me a while to get back to that, but I simply picked that up. And then when both of those projects came to a conclusion, I started doing some other things, did some running, some swimming, some cycling, did some triathlons.
Wow.
And then I started writing a weekly blog that I did for 4 years. So there were over 200 issues of that put out. That's titled Choices Do Matter. It's still out on the internet, and people still read it and comment occasionally.
And what inspired you to start that?
Well, that's, again, a storytelling kind of thing, because someone said, Bruce, you've got all these interesting stories. Why don't you put those on paper? They could just be short, 1,000-word, 1,200-word conversations where you say, here's a choice I made. Would you have made that choice? Was it a good choice? Was it a bad choice? What do you think? So the whole intent of the blog was to start a conversation, to have the reader think about making choices and how choices do affect the direction of your life.
Sure.
And then for us to get into a conversation online about those choices and how they affect you. So that's what the blog was about. And the stories range everywhere from, what was your first job and why, and how did that affect you, to how did you meet your partner, to this, that, and the other. I mean, just all kinds of things.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. And that was your first foray into writing?
That was my first foray into writing that anybody would read.
Sure.
Prior to that, I had written tons and probably tens of thousands of corporate memos, which I contend nobody reads. Absolutely
That's
nobody.
funny.
Really, I wish I still had it. I wrote about a 2-page memo once that ended with the last paragraph said, if you've read this far, please tell me and I will send you a gold cross pen and pencil set. That was back in about 1975 when cross pens and pencils were a big deal.
Okay.
And men wore them in their shirt pocket, and they had the little cross logo on them. And do you know what? Out of 170 people that worked for me, I gave away 2 cross pen and pencil sets. So nobody reads corporate speak.
Yeah.
I mean, and corporate speak has only gotten worse. It says absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So I had a long history of writing corporate speak. And it's been a really interesting transition for me to move to trying to write something in a way that I hope the reader will enjoy.
Yeah, it comes from a different place, I imagine. Oh, yeah. So at what point did you actually decide, I've got a book here, I'm going to start writing it?
I don't know that there was any pivotal moment. I had things laid out. I will tell you this. I sketched out kind of a rough draft of the whole thing. and I sent it to one of our granddaughters to read, or she volunteered to read it. And she said, "Granddaddy, I really like all this, but I'm on about page 97 before I really realize what the story is all about." And that's when I thought, gee, maybe this needs a little more structure and maybe I need a little outside help. And so that's when developmental editors and all of those kinds of professionals stepped in, and we started crafting something that really had a better story arc and caught the reader up more rapidly into the flow of the story.
Now, the title of your book is There Are No Answers Here, Only Questions. Why?
That was not the original title of the book. What happened was that often I would write a story, and it would go to the editor, and they would say, "Go deeper." And so I would think, well, it's deep enough already, you know. And then as I thought about it, I realized there was another layer there that I could go to. And memoir, to me, done right, is not so much about what happened. It's about what happens next. It's transition. And I think what people like to read is transition. They like to see that something started here, but it ended there. So the more I kept going deeper, the more layers I kept peeling back, if you will, the more I realized that there were no answers. There were only more questions. And then I realized that when the questions stop, everything stopped. Because when you stop being curious, when you stop asking questions, you're really no longer alive. You've really just gone into some suspended state of being. And so don't look for answers as much as you look for more questions. And that's kind of where the title comes from. That make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I love that. It's a really poignant perspective. But I also think it's not easy to live that way, you know, because we are beings that like to feel in control. And so I applaud you for, you know, actively pursuing those questions because it can be hard.
Thank you.
Yeah. You and I have talked about specifically surrounding what you went through medically. You and I have talked about privilege. Do you remember that on the phone?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure you remembered what I remembered.
You saw a blank look on my face? No. Pensive maybe, but not totally blank. Privilege to me is an interesting word. Interesting in the sense that I think many of us have it in ways that we don't even realize we have. First off, I'm male. That's a privilege. I don't think every man recognizes that, but it is. I'm white, Anglo-Saxon, college educated. Wow, just right there, that puts me in a really minority kind of position. And it opens doors for people that you don't always realize that you're opening. You think that everybody has that, but they don't. So privilege, I think, is something we just too often take for granted. I think the fact that we live in this country, I think that we have the freedom to walk around the way we do and the freedom to run red lights if we want to. I mean, maybe you get caught, but maybe you won't. There's just a whole ton of privileges that we don't think about. And when I started thinking about that, there's one point in the book where I tell the story about when we first moved to Charlotte. My son and I went fishing on the bank of the Catawba River, not far from here, and we sat there all day waiting for the fish to come to us. But the story then is 30 years later when our son is grown and has a boat, not a very big one, but a boat. And we go fishing on the Catawba River. And now we don't have to wait for the fish to come to us. We go to the fish. That's a privilege. Even a small boat is a privilege that the person sitting on the bank doesn't have. And when you start to think about things that way, I think you start to see things differently.
When in your life did that really become clear to you?
I think not until I really started digging into telling these stories. I think storytelling opens doors in our mind that otherwise don't get open for us.
Yes.
And it's not always in the telling of them that the door opens. It's in the thinking about what you're going to say when you do tell the story. I think often we just tell the story the same way, and we put a lot of things into it that don't belong. Was it Tuesday or was it Wednesday? No, wait a minute, let me think about it. It was really Wednesday. Well, that doesn't all need to be in there. Just say one day. So when you think about the story, think about the next layer below, think about the next layer below that, and you might come up with a better story. And the idea of that privilege comes about by thinking more about the story and what's really going on here beyond just that we went fishing in a small boat.
Sure. And I think that you mentioned that when you were going through your treatments too, though, that was something that you kind of recognized just because of who you were, access that you had.
I think that my treatments were here in Charlotte. We were fortunate enough to live in a neighborhood close to the hospitals. We were 10 or 15 minutes away from the major hospitals. Others who were in the waiting room with me had often driven 2 or 3 hours to get to treatment. Many of them may not even know how they were going to get home. And yet in the beginning, I would drive myself, pull up to the valet parking stand, toss my keys to the attendant, and walk in. Later, of course, my wife would have to drive me, and eventually I'd have to be rolled in a wheelchair. But so many people I encountered even had to take public transportation to and from treatment. So I just easily began to see that there was a privilege there that others didn't have.
Yeah. I think it's important to highlight medically because, you didn't even talk about the treatment itself, right? Or like the diagnosis itself, but everything around the treatment that so many of us take for granted, like access to transportation, access to a hospital, access to insurance, all of those things, right? They all matter and they all come into play. And when you're dealing with an illness or anything really, but when you're talking about something as serious as cancer, and your mind, I imagine, is already so emotionally exhausted thinking about the what ifs and just there's a fear there, a very valid fear. And that says nothing for what the actual treatment does to your body and what that feels like. And then you add these other layers, you were talking about layers earlier. All of these layers matter to a person's story.
Exactly. Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it can be easy for some people to just sort of feel, well, I'm entitled to this, or I'm sick, it's your job to treat me. Well, okay, if you're entitled to it, so is the next guy sitting beside you. And my job is to treat him or her just as much as to treat you. but I think there are a group of us that often think me first.
Sure. I think too, desperation causes us to do things that we don't necessarily think we're capable of until we're in that moment, right? And so there's certainly, again, a fear. When we make our decisions based out of fear, they often tend to be the worst decisions that we make. So I think even out of this place of not having all of your cylinders firing, right? You've got other things going on that you're thinking about, and you're not necessarily in the best headspace, right? So, but it's something that we always have to be aware of.
Exactly. Well, and I think many of us just simply have a blind spot to all of that.
Sure.
We're walking through life not even aware of the people around us who are suffering in so many ways we don't know.
Yeah. I think too, we live in a very individualistic society, right? And so community, while it's a word we know, I think oftentimes it is actually very foreign in practice to us outside of our immediate family. And so we don't always realize how the decisions that we make and the things that we're a part of affect other people, whether we can see that or not. Right.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And I think, I've certainly seen it in my life as more and more people move from the smaller communities to the larger communities. You might think that the sense of community would grow larger in the larger city, but it seems to shrink. The small towns seem to have a better sense of community than the large cities do. And I'm seeing that in the revitalization of a lot of the small towns around major cities. They're becoming their own little hub within a larger hub. And they're looking out for each other more than the larger hub does.
Yeah, I think you get lost in the largeness, right?
Yeah. And we talked a while ago about New York City.
Yeah.
Wonderful. But to New York City's credit, go into all of the boroughs, go into all of the neighborhoods. Greater New York City has hundreds, if not thousands, of individual neighborhoods that are very, very close-knit.
Yeah.
It's not all Midtown Manhattan. There's a lot going on there.
And I think, too, maybe hardship breeds connection.
Yeah.
And, it shouldn't have to, but I think we're very comfortable being individual when everything is going fine, right? When we can take care of everything and we don't think we need other people, we're comfortable being on our own, quote unquote. And so it's when you are unable to meet all of those needs yourself, right? That you really have to make community happen.
Exactly. Yeah, your needs are totally different on a sunny 72-degree day than when the temperature changes and the rain starts falling. Suddenly your list of needs gets longer.
Yeah, well said. So you mentioned the 2 projects that you worked with after you retired. Had you been involved with those before, or what kind of spurred you to get involved in those 2?
I was involved both with the Urban Ministry Center here in Charlotte for a number of years before, and I'd been involved with Habitat for Humanity here in Charlotte for a number of years as well. So both of those things had been very active in my life, along with work in interdenominational ministries or interfaith religious kind of events that try to take different faith traditions and find things more common than the things that separate us. I think we spend a lot of time in areas that only define us when we need to spend as much time thinking about things that define the other.
Yeah, I love that. What about these things drew you to them? Like, why homelessness? Why Habitat for Humanity?
Well, because I think everybody deserves a decent place to live, and I think everybody deserves a roof over their heads. So Habitat gives an individual, a family, an opportunity to buy a home. They're not given away, as some people think. And the homeless actually are not only better off housed, but economically it makes more sense for us to house them than to let them stay on the street. People on the street consume a tremendous amount of goods and services at no cost to themselves, but a great cost to the city. But affordable housing can end up with them having not only a roof over their head, but support around them, all for less money than is being spent to support them, whether it's drug rehab, whether it's jail time, whether it's this, that, or the other. It's just better to have that done.
Sure. It is a basic human need, right? Shelter, safety.
Yeah. Yeah, I think shelter, shelter, education, healthcare, are those basic needs and rights, or are they a privilege? And
I think they are, unfortunately, and they shouldn't be. I think they should be rights.
Yeah, and I don't want to make this too much of a political discussion, but if you think about who your neighbor is, your neighbor may be someone other than the person in the 5-bedroom home right next to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, your book, what was the journey like to actually, you wrote the book, what was the journey to get it published?
Well, seeing a stack of typewritten pages is one thing. Seeing a book with a nice, pretty cover on it is totally a different thing.
Sure.
Maybe we could talk for a minute about the difference between self-publishing and having one of the major publishers do a book.
Please do.
And there are really pros and cons to both of them. My book is self-published.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. First, I'm not anybody famous. I'm not anybody that you should know. So one of the big five is not going to really, answer my phone call the minute it comes in. I'm a first-time author. I'm older. How many more books do I have in me? There are all sorts of reasons that say maybe the big five and even the others aren't going to be all that interested. The other thing I looked at was the amount of control that you give to the publisher the minute you hand them the book. Mm-hmm. You can lose control of the title. You can lose control of the cover. You can lose control of a lot of the content, because then it becomes their book. And I don't know that I was ready to give up that much control. And then you look at the smaller publishers, and you're still going to be doing all the marketing yourself. You're still going to be doing most of the work. So why not just do it yourself and self-publish it? And it's a whole lot faster. It can take 5-10 years to get a book published today. Well, some of us may not have 5 or 10 years. So self-publishing, and we're seeing more and more books self-published every day.
Yeah. There's a huge wave of that for sure.
Yeah.
And with the advent of technology, it has really become a lucrative thing.
And you can't tell the difference in a self-published book and any other when you look at it on the shelf. I mean, it's not like these are run off on a mimeograph machine in somebody's basement.
Correct, yeah.
These are printed on the same big professional presses that the big guys use.
Yeah, I agree. I think, while it certainly has its downfalls, there are some things that technology has offered, and access to things is a huge part of that, right? Access to resources, access to book printers. Yeah. Like, who would have known where to go, before before the internet, and before that was readily accessible. So, that's really cool. Yeah. So you self-published, and then 2014 was when you released?
Well, no, The book
Yeah.
came out March 1st of this year, 2020.
That's right. You said that. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm thinking of after you went in remission, but you did say that. Yeah. So you were writing all of this through COVID and all of that. Yes. How did that affect how you were telling your story?
Well, that was kind of neat because everybody was holed up.
You weren't missing out on anything.
Might as well write. Nothing else going on. But yeah, so much of it went on then.
Yeah. Did it affect how you told your story at all because of what was happening in the world at that time?
I don't really think so. I think that what I tried to do with the story was continue to dig into how I feel now and how I felt then. Again, that to me is memoir. Memoir is, here's what I thought then, here's what I think now.
Yeah.
And those two will be different. What you thought 10, 20 years ago are different than what you think today.
I hope so, yes.
Yeah. And so if you think about those differences, then therein is the story of transition.
Sure.
And that's what people want to hear about.
Yeah. That's a good point. So you release it in March. What has it been like to then market it, get it out there, tell your story? You've been doing podcasts and
it's been a whole new learning curve, and that's the exciting part too. I mean, I'm sitting here with you today,
yes,
face to face, live, talking about this. And there again, I wouldn't have dreamed of that a number of years ago.
Sure.
I've learned all these inside baseball kind of marketing words about publishing that I didn't know. So I've really developed this whole new layer. And I think that's healthy because I think that's what people are all about. People are multidimensional. They're not just one thing, or I hope not. And so this has given me just a whole new outlook.
Yeah. I love that you chose to do this at your age. I think it is so amazing and important for you continue to live your life, right? You're not
as long as I can,
right? You're not saying, well, nothing. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm too old. I'm too this. I'm too that. You just decided, no, I'm going to do this, and
well,
you did it.
You haven't asked this, but I will tell you, I am 82. Well, 82 is just 28. If you look at it from a different angle.
That's true.
So I think if any of us just don't get caught up in the current age,
yes,
do what you want to do. And if you feel like doing it, and you can, go ahead and do it because you'll learn something from it. And curiosity is just the greatest thing in the world. There's controversy on who this quote belongs to, but it's something to the effect of, the only cure for boredom is curiosity, and there is no cure for curiosity.
I like that, yes. I think we can be very goal-oriented to the detriment of ourselves. We're waiting to arrive at some point, right? And the whole point is that we won't ever get there. But that needs to be part of the beauty of life.
Yeah, bingo.
Yeah. Is just continuing to seek and ask questions.
Yeah, bingo. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think we also get surrounded by the idea of what we perceive as expectations of ourselves at our age, or at our position in life, or whatever. We don't do that. Well, who's we? That's not done. Why not? You're your own person, so you define what the rules are.
Absolutely. I love that. Because that could be for anybody at any time, right?
Yeah, for you sitting here right now.
Yeah. I should be married with kids. And I'm not. But I'm doing something totally different that I love, and I'm here sitting with you. Yeah. That all is arbitrary. Yeah. How you treat people, how you treat the world and how you move through it is what matters. Yeah.
Cool.
Very cool. So do you think you have another book in you?
Well, yeah.
Yeah? I believe it.
It's 10 or 12 years from the time this book ends until now.
Yeah.
And as I said to you earlier, there are a whole bunch of stories in there. I told you about swimming and cycling and running. That didn't end well.
Really?
I got hit by a car.
Oh, my.
On my bicycle, and spent 3 days in ICU with a subdural hematoma.
Oh, my gosh.
Concussion, and a broken neck. So, yeah, my wife called a stop to my cycling.
I guess so. That seems reasonable.
Yeah. And I must say, I didn't disagree. Totally.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Had you been doing triathlons before?
No.
Dang it.
That whole thing came about as a way to recover from cancer.
Okay.
I needed to, I was pretty wiped out at the end of the cancer. So, I needed to be able to walk to the corner at least, find my car in a parking lot. I needed to do something. So I would walk to the corner, then eventually I'd run to the corner, then eventually I'd run all the way down to the end of the block, then further. Then both of our children had done triathlons. And I thought, well, how hard can it be? So
I love that that's what you thought.
So our son took me to a sporting goods store that outfitted people for triathlon, and spent all my money. He got me everything. He wasn't shy. And then said, "Dad, give me your credit card." And I'm like, wait a minute.
Hold on now.
So I end up with a bike and all kinds of stuff. And, had to learn. I knew how to ride a bike, but I didn't know how to clip in and that kind of stuff. I fell over several times trying to get my feet out of the damn pedal. And
it's totally different.
So, it's totally different. And it's a big difference riding in heavy traffic than it is riding on a little secluded bike trail.
Right.
So, I just started doing that, and one thing led to another, and ran a 5K, ended up on the podium, ran a 10K, ended up on the podium. And, your ego is kind of a funny creature. It's there whether you know it or not. And,
sure.
And you do very many events and end up with podium finishes, and pretty soon you think, boy, I'm on my way to Kona and an Ironman. And when really you need to be sitting on the couch watching the football game. The accident that sent me for loop-de-loops over the top of the car and ended me lying in the pavement, or on the pavement in the way of oncoming traffic, made me realize maybe I wasn't headed to the Ironman in Hawaii.
I hope you still make it to Hawaii, though, even without the Ironman. But had you completed a triathlon at that point?
Yes.
Of course you did.
Yeah. And there's a local charity ride here in Charlotte that I had done over 100 miles in. So, I was comfortable on my bike.
Yeah. After the accident, was it hard for you to get moving again? Did you feel discouraged?
No, I went from the road bike. I had a commuter bike, a hybrid commuter that could be ridden on the sidewalk. It's hard to ride a road bike on the sidewalk because the tires blow out too easy. The road bike tires are about 130 pounds per square inch of pressure, so they hit a pebble and they'll go flat.
Oh.
But a hybrid commuter is built to hit potholes. It's got about 35 pounds of pressure. It'll hit potholes, it'll jump curbs, it'll do stuff that a road bike won't do. They're not as fast, but they're a lot safer.
Yeah.
And you're sitting more upright, whereas a road bike, you're trying to beat the air resistance, so you all bent over. So you've got better visibility and more maneuverability, so I rode that. Continued to swim, continued to run some. But I think what changed really was my perspective. I started doing it for fun and not for the podium finish. And that's a huge difference. I think there's a big difference between someone who is active and someone who wants to simply be an athlete. Remaining active, I think, is important. Ending up on the podium, maybe not so much so.
I just love that. I do not think the word discouraged is in your dictionary at all. Everything is just like, oh, and then I just got up and I kept going and I did the next thing. Yeah. And it's a fabulous way to walk through life. I admire it so much because, like you said, our egos are funny and we can really get caught up in our egos and what that makes us feel about ourselves or what we think we're entitled to.
Yeah.
So I really do. I've loved talking to you and hearing your story. And is there anything I didn't ask about that you wanted to talk about?
I'm not sure. You covered an awful lot of ground.
Oh, good.
I guess I'd say one thing. We all have stories, and really, we have more than one story. We have lots of stories. And I think sharing those stories is important. And I would encourage anyone, whether they're my age or much younger, to try and put those stories on paper. They'll get lost if you don't. And they don't have to be perfect, and nobody has to even read them. But get them on paper. If for no other reason, then that's part of your legacy. So that would be the one thing I'd add.
I agree. I think a lot of times, for all of the talk of ego, we are also our own worst critics. And it's a really interesting tension that we hold there. A lot of people don't think they have a story or a valuable story. And any story is valuable, right?
Yes,
it's your lived experience. Exactly. So I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, we all have a story. And I guarantee you that even the most boring really isn't.
Yeah, exactly.
If you think about it and look for the nuances and look for the change that resulted in the story. And that will be what's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I do have a question that I ask everybody at the end of each episode, which is because we value stories so much and our lived experiences are so valuable. So through the lens of your experience, what does compassion mean to you?
Compassion, to me, is a lot more than just wrapping my arms around you and telling you I love you. Compassion to me is trying to understand without any judgment, to try as best I can to understand your culture and what makes you who you are. And it's only when I understand that culture that I can start to understand you as an individual and have compassion for where you are. So compassion maybe is an understanding, and that takes work. It's not easy.
Yes, agreed. I love that. I love that answer. I think it's important that we do try to understand people and meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
Bruce, I have loved talking to you. You are such a light, and I just wish you the best of luck with this book and the next one. and we'll have to meet again when the next one comes out.
I love that.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends and family, share it on social media, and rate and review it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also support the podcast financially by going to my website, thehxpod.com, linked in the show notes, and clicking on Donate. It takes a lot of time and resources to create this podcast, so every little bit helps. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and love